Welcome back, everyone. It's Dave Bretthauer. I'm here today to talk to you about a new project. Call it the Tuckaway Heart Card. I've designed this card to still fit inside a regular A2 size envelope. The recipient will receive the card, pull it out, and be able to open it up. There's a center panel that tucks under the left side of the heart, a small hidden space where you can put your greeting or message inside. So let's get started. First, we need to emboss the damask heart. This will be the main piece that you're going to be putting onto the card. And I'm going to show you two different ways to color this heart. The first step is to ink the rubber with some Versamark ink. This gets it nice and sticky and is a great ink for embossing. I'm stamping it on a cotton candy piece of cardstock, right in the middle. Press firmly so you get a good image. And I'm going to put some white embossing powder over the image. It'll just be embossed in plain old white. Make sure the entire image is covered and have a catch sheet underneath for pouring the excess embossing powder off onto. You can then pour that back into your container. I'm going to use a heat gun to emboss the embossing powder and make sure that I get everything melted. The first way that I'm going to show you how to color this heart is a faded ink technique. I want you to use several shades of ink. I'm using Memento Angel Pink, Memento Desert Sand, and a Memento marker in Rosebud. I'm starting with the Angel Pink, the lightest color, and rubbing the pad directly on the paper. Once I've filled in a portion of it, I'm going to switch to the Rosebud marker. I'm going to build up the outline of the heart with this Rosebud color. Just coloring, almost scribbling around the edge, a little bit onto the embossed design. Don't worry about any excess, that'll be trimmed off later. I'll switch to the Desert Sand color now, adding a little bit around the edge and using it to blend some of that Rosebud pink in towards the middle. I'm not going to use too much, just a little bit for accent. And I'm going to go back with my finger to blend things together. All of the ink that's still sitting on top of the embossed design will rub into the spaces in between those damask prints. I'll follow up with a little bit more Angel Pink. This will darken the paper and add some more ink to work with. I'll use the Rosebud marker again to add little spots of color here and there, coloring on top of the embossed image, and then using my finger or a finger dauber to rub the ink into place around those images. Add a little bit, rub it in, and add some more if you need to. Now it's just a matter of getting it to the level that you like. Some of you might want a more pastel look, some of you might want a deeper look. But add ink, rub it in, and add some more till you like it. In general, my suggestion would be to keep it lighter in the middle and darker towards the outside to give it just a little bit of dimension. It will look like a faded watercolor wash once you're done, with the ink grabbing around the edges of the embossed design. Once the design is dry, you can cut it out. I'm going to use the Grand Heart die, which I designed to perfectly trim out the damask heart image. You notice it has a clear grid on it for easy positioning. I'm just going to put the piece underneath and the die on top and run it through my machine. I'm not going to bother using any tape. I'll just put the top plate in position and carefully send it through the die cut machine. The stamped image is actually just slightly larger than the die, so it gets trimmed out right to the very edge of the image. I'll pull it back around, lift the plate, and pull up the die, and you can see the image is trimmed out perfectly. For those of you who want to try something a little bit more advanced, I've come up with an alcohol ink and embossing technique that I think you'll really like. I'm using my alcohol ink refills for my Copic markers. I suggest using a minimum of 4 different shades to do this technique. You'll put drops of ink onto a piece of coated cardstock. For example, I'm using a Star Dream paper. Begin with your darkest ink, add a drop here and there, and watch as the alcohol interacts. The bloom of the alcohol will push the last color out of the way. I'm starting with my darkest color and going lighter and lighter. There's no need to fill the entire paper with ink. I just want to create an area that's vaguely in the shape of the heart. You can add as much ink as you want, but I would stop early since it moves a lot. Allow this to dry completely before moving on to the next step. We're going to emboss it just the same way we did before. I'm going to use Versamark ink, clear sticky ink, to ink up the rubber and stamp out the design. Make sure the entire image is covered well and that you stamp on a firm surface. This is a large image, so you need to make sure that the pressure is even. This will ensure that the design embosses nicely. I'm going to put a ket sheet underneath again and pour white embossing powder over the inked image. Once you pour off the excess, you'll see if you've covered the entire image over to the edge of the inked area. Don't worry if it doesn't go all the way, it'll just add to the look of the piece. In my studio, I keep refills for all my Copic markers, including a refill for the colorless blender. This blender solution is good for a multitude of different blending techniques using alcohol inks. Begin by putting a few drops of the blending solution right on top of some of the embossed areas, and then go back and add some more of the ink that you originally used to stain the paper. I drizzle it on here and there, and I use different shades pretty much around the edge, but just fill in a pocket here or there, and allow the ink to move around. You'll get a very interesting effect once it's dried. You can see the embossing powder begins to flake off and lift from the paper. It's at this point that you can distress the image. Using your finger, you can start to peel some of that embossing off. I'm going to remove the right-hand side of the heart. Not everything, you want to leave some of it still intact, but open up some of that area as if it's been aged or distressed a little. And underneath there'll be some ghost images of the original design. As you can see, it comes off pretty easy, depending on where the alcohol ink has hit it. Once you've removed as much of the embossing powder as you like, it's time to die cut. Again, we'll use the Grand Heart die and position it over the image, put the top plate on, and run it through the machine. The effect is a great distressed design with an area opened up for embellishment. It's now time to build the base card with a very versatile scoring pattern. I'm going to use a scoring board to get my score lines in just the right place. The size of the paper is 4 1/4 inches by 11 inches long, and I'm scoring it at the 3 1/2 inch mark and the 6 1/4 inch mark. I provided a diagram here for you to check out those dimensions. Then I'll use a straight edge, in this case I just grabbed a note card, to make marks at the 9 inch mark. You'll make one mark at the top and one mark at the bottom in pencil so that you can erase that later. There's one at the top and one at the bottom. You're not scoring that. Then you'll take the Grand Heart die and position it on the paper. You want the middle of the heart to be centered with those pencil lines. I'll use a couple pieces of tape to hold it in position before I run it through the die cut machine. Before you continue, just make sure that that die is centered with those pencil marks. Now it's time to die cut. The trick that you need to know for making this cut depends on how you put this die and cardstock onto the machine. Notice that I'm letting some of the heart hang off the edge of the bottom plate. I have that lined up with the pencil marks that I made before. I'm going to put the top plate on and run it through. Hold it into place, take care to get it started, run it through, and it'll pop just halfway. Once you pull it out, you will see that only half of the heart has been die cut. Carefully lift the tape up off the cardstock to remove the die, and you'll see that the left side of the heart has cut into the paper while the right side hasn't. You'll get something like this. Think about using any of our other large dies to create a special flap. For example, our scallop circle die could create a scallop circle flap. Back on your work surface, you can complete this portion of the card by aligning the heart with the cut you just made using the die in the cardstock. Once you've decided whether you want to use the faded ink technique or the alcohol emboss technique, it's time to make the embellishments for the card. There's lots of different things to do, but I've decided to put a special label on here and decorate it with some hearts. I'm using our pastry label die on top of a piece of cotton candy cardstock. I'll put the top plate on and run it through the machine. I have the choice here of 3 different labels. And I've decided that the center label, the scalloped oval, will look best with my design. I'll pull off the die, and I'm just going to use the excess piece of paper to get that off of my die plate if it gets stuck. To decorate the center panel of the card, I've cut out a piece of bubblegum distress dot cardstock. The measurements are 2 3/4 inches wide, 4 1/4 inches tall. I'm applying adhesive to the back and then adhering that to the center portion in between the score lines on the card. I'm going to use the bottom edge of the card to line that up and adhere it before moving on to the next panel. But first, I have to get the ribbon in place. I've chosen some ribbon to match the current distress dot cardstock that I'm using for the background. This is 1/8 inch wide satin polka dot ribbon, and I'm going to cut the ends sharp so that they'll thread through the holes of the label easily. I'm going to thread through the front, pulling around the back of the label, and then thread through the other hole. This will make the ribbon disappear in back of the label so that the front side is open and it just comes out around the ends of the label. No need to glue this in place because you may want to position it differently once you get this label adhered to this panel. Make sure that your ribbon is at least 1/2 inch longer on either side so that it'll wrap around the back of the panel and be hidden. I'm going to apply some adhesive using my ATG gun. Make sure any excess adhesive gets pulled around the back side before proceeding. You'll be using this adhesive to hold the ribbon in place. Now position the label in the lower left corner of the panel and adjust the ribbon so that it hangs off either end. Then wrap the ribbon around the right side and the left side of the panel, securing it into the adhesive. Put this panel in place, lining it up with the score mark, but take care not to go over the score mark of the card. I'll use my Heart Delights die to create a bunch of little hearts to decorate the label. I originally designed this to create a border along the edge of the card, but it cuts out about 20 different hearts in varying sizes every time you pass it through the die cut machine. You can save those and use them for all sorts of different projects. I like to do this with several different shades of cardstock, so I'll have lots of different hearts, lots of different sizes, and lots of different colors to work with when I'm embellishing a project. I'm going to pull off the top plate and you can see all the variety of hearts. Pick out a few that you think will look nice decorating that pastry label that you just secured to the card. I'm going to use some white crafting glue to put a little dot of adhesive onto the tag and then add my heart. I'm going to start with the largest heart first, add another drop of adhesive, and then add another die cut heart on top of it. I think it's a little bit easier to add a drop of glue and then your embellished piece rather than putting adhesive on the back of a tiny object like this and putting it into place. Don't forget that you need to erase those little lines that you made at the 9-inch mark on your card. Just use a white or soft gum eraser to get rid of them so you don't discolor the cardstock. The last step is to add a secret message in the hidden panel on your Tuckaway card. Just fold that under the heart flap, put it in an envelope, and mail it off to some lucky friend on your list. This simple and unique design can be used in so many different ways, and using the special techniques I taught you, no 2 cards will look alike. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope I've inspired you with a few new ideas.